Welcome to this edition of the Rainer Report. I'll be sharing with you a number. This number is not necessarily made up out of thin air, but it's not necessarily statistically validated. So somewhere between statistically validated and totally made up, there is a number. And it's truly an anecdotal number, but it is not as much the number as it is what you need to be doing in your outwardly focused efforts within your church. My name is Thom Rainer. You're a part of the Rainer Report, and I love sharing this with you each and every week. We release this on Wednesdays, but you're able to view it at any time, and I hope it's been beneficial not only to you, but to be able to share it with your churches as well. Okay, so what is that number? What's that so-called magic number? I don't want to even use the word magic because now it'll become a magic bullet, but what is that number? The number is 4. You know, Three Dog Night said 1 is the loneliest number that you'll ever know. Well, 4 can be one of the most helpful numbers that you will ever know, because as I have worked with churches, consulted with churches, heard from churches, basically here is what I'm telling them. What you're currently doing to reach beyond the walls of your church needs to increase by a 4-fold factor. That sounds dramatic, that sounds challenging, but it is a reality. Here's what has happened, good folks. Over the years, our congregations have become more and more inwardly focused. And I realize that that's a blanket statement, and not all congregations, not all local churches fall under that blanket. I get that. But for the most part, our congregations have been moving more and more toward an inwardly focused activity base. So let's begin to look at why your church needs to quadruple its outreach efforts. Okay, if you only do 3 times, if you only do 2 times, that's certainly better than where you are right now. If you do 5 times, it's even better. But of course, I know that we're dealing with churches that have limited time, limited resources, and so I will stay with that number 4. Why your church needs to quadruple its outreach efforts. Number 1, many churches have distressing inertia, and they need a shock to the system. That again is a very bold statement, maybe even an outlandish statement for many of you, to say that you are in distressing inertia. Now, what does that mean? Well, inertia is when all of your activity and resources start moving toward you inwardly. It's where it's because of the inward type of direction, everything freezes in terms of outward focus. And I can tell you beyond a shadow of a doubt that many churches right now are in distressing inertia. They are to the point where hardly anything that they do in the course of a week, a month, certainly a year, that is outwardly focused. And so they're in a distressing inertia, and they're asking the question, why is our church declining? Why are we having conflict within our church? Why do people seem demoralized? Why are we losing staff? Why are we losing members? Now, again, this is not a single answer to that, but it is a highly possible, even a highly likely answer. Many churches are in distressing inertia, and they need a shock to the system. That shock to the system is whatever you are doing now, increase it 4-fold. Well, obviously, if you're doing nothing, 4 times 0 is nothing. So you have to begin to do something and then increase it more and more on a regular basis. Okay, the second point that I would bring up on this is that means we must reallocate the church's resources. A church only has so much time. A church only has so much money. But do you know what we have? We have all the time and money that God has said we need to do what we need to do to be His church. You're not lacking in resources. What's possibly, even probably happening is that you are lacking in how you allocate those resources. So here's one way to look at it. As the best you can, look at all the ministries, activities, programs. Look at everything that your church does within the course of a week. I don't know how many hundreds of hours that would be. It would depend upon the size of the church. It would depend upon the number of people participating. For example, if you had people in groups and you had 100 people in groups and they were in groups 1 hour a week on the average, that would be 100 hours that would be within the groups. If you get the point, Do a rough estimate of how much time your church is doing in various activities. Then ask this question: how much of those hundreds of hours, perhaps even thousands of hours, is spent reaching beyond the walls of the church? How much of that is spent particularly in the community and even more specifically involved in gospel conversations? How much of the time, and you can also do this financially, it's not quite as easy to do a fourfold or fivefold on financial resources, but you certainly can do it on time. And once you figure that out, here's what you need to do. You need to start reallocating. Okay, in the course of a week, our church's activities, programs, and ministries consume 1,000 church member hours. I just made that number up. We're currently doing maybe 50 hours a week. That would be very, very lucky, fortunate if you were doing that. In outwardly focused activities, you need to increase that fourfold to 200 hours. And you know, what would that mean? That would mean one member doing this, another member doing that. Again, it's not so much the precision of the numbers, it is the direction of the actions. So begin to look at how you can increase the outward focus, which literally means going into the community, making the type of relationships that will make a difference, having gospel conversations, and moving outwardly intentionally. And this brings up the third point. Cultural Christianity is dead. You've heard me talk about this. You've even watched me talk about this on the Rainer Report if you've ever seen any of these. Cultural Christianity is dead. Now, what that means is the easy growth that we used to have in the past is no longer available. And you've heard me give the example, but I'll give the description again. The description is this: there were people 15, 20 years ago, maybe even 10 years ago, who came to your church because it was the culturally acceptable, expected thing to do. Some of them were politicians needing votes. Some of them were business people needing customers. Some of them were just neighbors desiring acceptance. And so in order to be accepted, in order to have a viable business, in order to get votes politically, whatever the case may be, they said, I need to go to church. It's just the culturally expected thing of me. They weren't believers, but they went to church. They certainly weren't anti-Christian or anti-church, and they came to your church. That's much of your easy growth of the past. That's no longer the reality. Cultural Christianity is dead. I kind of like that, frankly, because it does separate the wheat from the chaff. It does tell us who the sheep and the goats are, and it's not precision, but it does give us an idea of who is really committed to the cause of Christ and thus to the church. Third point, cultural Christianity is dead. Fourth point, outreach by invitation is on the rise. Now, what does that mean? That simply means more and more churches have their church members intentionally inviting people to church. It's just as simple as that. We have a resource that we've used and talked about on several occasions called Invite Your One. If you're interested in looking at it, go to inviteyourone.com. It's not the only one that is out there. It's not a magic bullet. But the purpose behind that is to get everyone in your church accustomed and excited about inviting people to church. We started with a one single day event, but that is not the intention of Invite Your One to be a single day event. The intention is to create a new culture of inviting people or of invitation. We are seeing more and more church members becoming highly intentional about inviting people to church, which brings me to the fifth and final point. There is still receptivity to the gospel. Not too long ago, Jonathan and I did a podcast on two old books that I had written. One was called Surprising Insights from the Unchurched, and the other was The Unchurched Next Door. We did two separate podcasts on that. And when it was all said and done, at least from anecdotal follow-up and some database follow-up, we concluded that the conclusions of those books that were 16, 17, 18 years old are for the most part still valid today. About 8 out of 10 people, if you invite them to church, will come if you walk into the church building with them. If you meet them somewhere and say, we're going to go into the church building. It's an amazing number. Most people have no awareness of it because, frankly, most people have not tried it. And so that could be one of the key ways that you could see your outward focus increase if you begin to have highly intentional efforts to just simply invite people to come to your worship services. I could say a lot more, but I try to keep these around 10 or 11 minutes just so that you can get a quick snippet every week of some of the issues I think are very important to you. Once again, this is why your church needs to quadruple. 4, that's the number. It's outreach efforts. We've given you some samples and we've given you some directions, and I hope it has been helpful. Always helpful to me is Tim Songster and Costco and Associates, and they're the people that we recommend when you get ready to build a facility, remodel a facility, have questions about facility. You see their website is churchdesign.com. They're the sponsor of Rainer on Leadership, and it's my hope and desire that you will contact them. You will not be disappointed. I have 2 sons that have used Costco in major building projects, so I can say, as a father, watching what has happened has been a great experience. So thank you, Tim Songster. Thank you, churchdesign.com. Thank you, Costco, for being our sponsor. And thank you, audience, for being here each and every week. We'll continue the Rainer Report, where we will share with you some of the issues that we think are most pressing and most important to your congregation. And I'll see you next week on the Rainer Report.